Africa has suffered and experienced violence through the acts of terrorism for many years. There are many terrorist organizations throughout Africa. The most deadliest of them all are Boko Haram in Nigeria and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Boko Haram has overtaken ISIS. The terror group claimed 6,644 lives. And second in line is Al-Shabaab, which claimed 1,021 lives. Most terrorist organizations have grievances with governments, but Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab go beyond. Their sole aim is to establish Islamic State governments, caliphates, and Sharia law. To understand terrorism in Africa, David Otto explains.
One of the issues that we have is we have to try and understand that there is a difference in the terrorist activities that we face in the West, and there is also a difference in the terrorist activities that we face in Africa. North Africa has had its own terrorist organizations which are more linked to the Middle East, but I think the concentration of this discussion today should be on West Africa, and we're talking about the most lethal and dangerous organization that exists as we speak, Boko Haram. It's an organization that began in 2002 by a young philanthropist called Mohammed Yusuf. Mohammed Yusuf was somebody who was looking after the young people who lacked the qualities, who lacked the facilities, who lacked the drive, and who lacked the opportunity that other kids lacked in the communities. Mohammed Yusuf made sure that these young people had something else to do. But the dynamics of politics in the utilization of the groups that Mohammed Yusuf had turned Boko Haram into the most lethal terrorist organization that we have today. And this incident happened in 2009 when more than 700 young people were killed, and eventually the death of Mohammed Yusuf himself. Boko Haram has now become the world's most deadliest organization in the world. It was then seen by countries like Cameroon, it was then seen by countries like Niger and Chad, and even the West as a Nigerian problem, because Boko Haram had actually focused its attention in northern Nigeria. But what was not seen at the time was that the three main leaders who headed Boko Haram at the time, one of them, who was Mohammed Yusuf at the time, was a Kanuri. The second person was Mamanu, who came from Cameroon. And the third individual was Abubakar Shekau, who is the current leader of Boko Haram. So when you look at the dynamics of what was happening at the time, you will understand that Boko Haram already had a regional misc. But what happened with Boko Haram? Boko Haram, was looking to introduce an Islamic State in northern Nigeria. Boko Haram had pledged, to introduce an Islamic State through the government of Borno State, when they had actually tabled an invitation to the committee, by the Islamic Committee, to form a Sharia state, which eventually was something that had been introduced in 1999 by the then Obasanjo, who was the first civilian ruler after the military regimes. So you can understand that the introduction of Sharia law in 1999 under the auspices of Obasanjo, and the eventual, turning of 12 Sharia states in the north into Sharia states, was one of the precursors that gave room for Boko Haram to come into place. This is an organization that believes in the Sunni Salafist jihadist religion, the extremist views. This is an organization that believes that other Christians and other individuals in the community who do not have the same ideology are supposed to be apostates. But the management of Boko Haram has gone wrong. The previous regime of Goodluck Jonathan did his best, but that was not good enough. When Buhari came to power, he's also done his best, but that is still not good enough. What has to be done with terrorism in Africa, what has to be done with Boko Haram, is to look at the dynamics of what actually happened in the first place. How do you address the motivational factors? How do you address the reasons why people became involved in terrorism in the first place is important. How do you address the reasons, how the methods by which people acquire weapons and capabilities, to be able to fight, the government? And how also do you deny Boko Haram an opportunity to operate? What the military has done since Buhari came to power was to deny, and is to deny, the opportunity of Boko Haram to operate as they used to operate before. But the event of Sunday, the 29th, has shown a different dynamics of Boko Haram. Boko Haram still has the capability to attack the military. It is therefore wrong for the government to accept that the organization has been technically defeated. But what is the dynamics of Africa? What are other African countries doing? What is Nigeria doing? What is Cameroon doing? What is Niger doing? What is Chad doing to stop the organization from operating? We have to understand the internal dynamics. In March 2014, March 2014, Boko Haram pledged its allegiance to Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. This has completely changed the dynamics of Boko Haram. So instead of Boko Haram or Abubakar Shekau being the national emir of Boko Haram, he is now the provincial emir, which means he takes instructions from Abubakar al-Baghdadi, who is the head of the Islamic State. So we have now left an organization that actually began in Maiduguri with about 10 guns, to move to an organization that now is more deadly than ISIL. So what we see today is that, the terrorism trend in Africa has expanded. Every country has to be able to understand that, they have to take proactive measures to see that, they have solutions in place, to see that they have programs in place to stop young men and young women from being recruited into these organizations. Our traveling to this area has shown us a lot of things. Being to northern Nigeria, northern Cameroon, Niger and Chad gives you the impression that the work that is being done on paper is actually not done on ground. So we need a structure. We don't have a framework. So in order for us in Africa to understand how to defeat these organizations, we have to look at the lessons of different countries. Yes, terrorism in Africa, terrorism in Nigeria takes place more offline than online. But the government has to be able to put a framework in place to ensure that, we have a sustainable strategy to defeat this organization. That has to be a regional strategy.